Well, welcome everyone. I'm thrilled to see you all here today. We are together today for the inaugural convening of the JPAL Economics of Decarbonization Working Group. And I know this is a really busy time for all of you, so we're really appreciative that you've made time to be here with us today. I'm Erin Graber. I am the Environment, Energy, and Climate Change Sector Lead. We refer to ourselves as the E2C2 team, so you'll hear that acronym quite a bit today. And I'll be emceeing and working closely with Peter just to help facilitate the conversations throughout the day. And just to start, I wanted to point out we have a QR code on the table tents on everyone's table. If you access that, it'll bring you to the link tree that has all of the resources and the materials for today. So we have our agenda, we have speaker bios, and it also provides connection information for Wi-Fi. There's a list of rooms that are also in the vicinity that you can access if you need to take a phone call or just have some space. And there's a few other resources there as well, so please feel free to check that out. If you'd prefer to be on your computer, I also sent that link in the email that went out yesterday afternoon. I think the only other logistics that I wanted to mention are the bathrooms. So if you go past the elevators, they're all on the left-hand side. And we have coffee, we have breakfast set up, so feel free to grab what you need throughout the morning. And with that, I think I'll go ahead and I'll introduce our speakers for this morning. So we'll be spending about an hour or so just kind of introducing everyone to JPAL resources and the collaboration opportunities that we have for researchers. Kim Daddison will be kicking us off. She is our Associate Director of Policy at JPAL North America. And Kim's going to be providing kind of a brief introduction to who we are and what we do. She'll also talk a little bit about JPAL Global's King Climate Action Initiative, who has generously funded the event today. And then she'll talk a bit about the commitment that we have to research and policy action in climate space. Peter Christensen is an associate professor of economics at the University of Illinois. He's currently on leave at Stanford, and he's also the JPAL North America Economics of Decarbonization Working Group lead. So he's been really collaborating very closely with us on today's event. And he's going to be kind of highlighting the motivation behind kind of the importance of developing a coordinated decarbonization research agenda among researchers in order to inform engagement with policymakers. We also have Bruce Sacerdote, who is the Richard S. Braddock 1963 professor in economics at Dartmouth College. He is also the co-director for JPAL North America's State and Local Innovation Initiative. And Bruce is going to be discussing the initiative strategy and some of our key activities. And this includes the newly launched LEVER program, and kind of how it's working to build the capacity of state and local governments to create and use rigorous evidence. And then I'll just kind of wrap up the session by providing a brief overview of the E2C2 team and a few more details about what the LEVER program is and opportunities for researcher engagement. So with that, I'll hand it over to Kim.
All right, thank you, Erin. Well, as Erin said, I'm Kim Daddison. I am the Associate Director for Policy at JPAL North America. And before we get started, I just thought I'd give a brief overview of JPAL. So we are the Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab, or JPAL. You'll hear a lot of acronyms today, so I don't know if you want to get your pens out and keep a list. But we were founded in 2003. We are a poverty research center in the economics department here at MIT. And we work here at the North America Regional Office, which is 10 years old and which focuses specifically on research and policy in North America. The mission overall is to reduce poverty by ensuring that policy is informed by scientific evidence. And we have three core functions. First is research. We fund and we run research projects, specifically randomized evaluations that are aimed at testing policies that are geared towards improving the lives of people experiencing poverty. Second, we do policy outreach, and here we aim to ensure that research is translated into policy and practice and that the results of our evaluations end up in the hands of policymakers and decision makers across North America. The third core function is capacity building, and we lead evaluation trainings to build the capacity of nonprofit and government leaders and use evidence to help think about and how to do evaluations in their practice. So these core functions really act to connect the dots from research to action. So next we're going to zoom in a little bit on the real strength of JPAL North America, which is building partnerships between researchers and practitioners to launch policy relevant studies. So a lot of the work at JPAL focuses on overcoming the barriers that prevent important, high-quality, policy-relevant research partnerships from getting off the ground. And this photo is a sign that used to be posted on MIT's campus, and it's exactly what the problem that we're trying to solve. As many of you know, it's both incredibly difficult but also very rewarding to build the kind of collaborative, trusting relationships between researchers and practitioners that actually yield the best studies. Research that addresses pressing questions for government decision makers through a process that they understand and help inform is more likely to generate answers that they trust, and answers that will actually then influence policy. But these relationships don't build themselves. So in practice, what does JPAL do to help build bridges? Well, there's several things. So this map shows the many partners that we've worked with over the last 10 years, and this work has taken several different forms. So for example, we do what we call a lot of project matchmaking, and this is where we introduce implementing partners who have a research question to researchers in our network who have an interest and expertise in that domain. We bring together academic experts just like yourselves to help set research agenda and to gauge the strength of evidence that is being generated. We run competitive research funding rounds that catalyze the projects most likely to answer game-changing, policy-relevant questions. And we work directly with both implementing partners and research teams of early-stage projects to offer training, capacity building, and resources that draw on our 20 years of experience running randomized evaluations. So in a few minutes, as Aaron said, you'll hear from Bruce Sacerdote, the co-chair of our State and Local Innovation Initiative, who can share more about the work of building the capacity of state and local governments to create and use rigorous evidence. So today we'll be talking in depth about applying this JPAL's approach to catalyze a movement in climate change. So how is climate change connected to the work we do? The United States is the second largest producer of greenhouse gases. The consequences of climate change are already being felt. Heat-related mortality, worsening food security, extreme weather events that damage economies and displace populations are just a few of the examples. These effects will disproportionately harm people experiencing poverty, particularly in low-income and middle-income countries, many of the same livelihoods that we have reached and aim to reach with the evidence-informed policy and programs that we support. It's a multidimensional problem that is as big and complex as poverty itself. And like poverty, there is no silver bullet to solve climate change. It's also a sector where evidence use is rare. So engineering estimates are hard to predict, but have often been more optimistic than real-world impacts. But policymakers still need to take significant action to mitigate climate change in the next 10 to 15 years to avoid the worst climate scenarios. But now we have an opportunity. Now there's growing political will and resources to do more on climate change. And the JPAL North America E2C2 team, led by Aaron, is leading this effort in our region in close collaboration with the State and Local Innovation Initiative, which Peter, Bruce, and Aaron, again, will speak to you about later in this session. The JPAL North America E2C2 team is also conducted in close collaboration with the JPAL King Climate Action Initiative, or KCI, yet another acronym. This initiative, as Aaron mentioned, is funded by King Philanthropies, and it's a global research initiative at JPAL supporting projects at the nexus of climate change and poverty alleviation all around the world. KCI's goal over the next 10 years is to reach 25 million people and to generate climate benefits and co-benefits of $125 million, focusing on solutions that benefit people in poverty. KCI focuses on the four most pressing climate and environmental related changes around the world: climate change mitigation, so reducing carbon and other GHG emissions; pollution reduction, reducing harmful carbon co-pollutants; climate change adaptation, building people and communities' ability to adapt to climate change; and energy access, increasing access to affordable, reliable energy in low-income houses and communities. The Keen Climate Initiative is taking a multi-pronged approach to evaluation in the climate and environment space. So they have research projects where we design, pilot, and evaluate innovations that overcome barriers to adoption and diffusion, improve implementation, strengthen enforcement and regulation. The work that we're here to do today, co-developing a decarbonization research agenda in North America, is contributing to this track. They're also scaling projects. So scaling effective solutions found by funding technical assistance to decision makers in government, the private sector, and NGOs. And we hope that the work we're embarking on now will lead to an evidence base that informs decisions at scale for decision makers in North America in the future. And we're thrilled to welcome a number of KCI fellows from multiple regional offices here today who are all working on specific projects to develop and scale partnerships. I don't know if they want to raise their hands or say hello. All right, great. And we also would like to recognize KCI's generous sponsorship of the inaugural convening today. So that's all I have in my introduction. I don't know if you have any questions. If not, I will pass it over to Peter, I think. All right, thank you very much. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Kim. I just want to, before I make my brief remarks here, thank Aaron's team for all of the hard work that's been done over the last 6+ months to put this together. It's really great to see everybody here in the room. Thank you all for coming as well. We tried to make this as simple as we could to get to, but it still, of course, is demanding on time, and we know that the opportunity cost of your time is high, and so it's great, just great to have you here. So this is, we think the start of addressing a problem that I'm going to lay out here in about 8 to 10 slides that I've sort of seen over the last few years of beginning to do this work. So the motivation for this working group is, the agenda for this brief presentation is going to be providing a bit of a motivation, and then talking a little bit about the objectives of this working group as we see them today, and then some of the objectives for today's convening. So the basic motivation is that whereas, if you were starting to do some work on evaluating climate change mitigation programs, 5 years ago, you might have been thinking, well, there are some interesting programs out there to evaluate. It's a very different landscape today. So now the funding is flowing from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and from IRA. It's flowing very quickly. If you're talking to state and local governments today and talking to them about their climate action plans, you're probably hearing that now we have this plan. We don't know exactly how to spend the funds, but our proposals are now being funded, and we have to figure out how to spend the money. That's at least the conversation that I've had with several city-level governments over the last 12 months. And so the question is, so this is what a climate action plan, or an example of a climate action plan for King County, which is Seattle Metro. We've been working with them or speaking with them about potentially rolling out a series of evaluations and heat pump and other programs over the next 12 months. 90% of at least the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law funding for climate change mitigation decarbonization programs are going to be implemented at the state and local level. So the best case scenario here is that you have hundreds of state and local governments that are rolling out basically policy experiments, and if we can embed randomization or other rigorous evaluation techniques, we can actually relatively quickly now figure out what's working, what should be scaled, and what's not working, what's not cost effective, and what maybe should be defunded, and so how to prioritize. That is not necessarily how all governments are thinking about this, so we need to coordinate ourselves as a research body to be able to provide some of the guidance on how to perform evaluations and then ultimately on how to prioritize programs. All of these programs, by the way, that are we're going to see being rolled out in the next 12 to 36 months are subject to evaluation of some kind. So what does that mean? That means that when you receive funding from the federal government to roll out your local heat pump program or transit subsidy or charging station policy or program, you have to submit a report that evaluates the impact, the carbon emissions reductions that you expect to achieve as a result of that program. You can imagine that the way that this is going to be, this evaluation requirement is going to be satisfied is going to be very heterogeneous across local governments, and there isn't necessarily a consistent view at this level that rigorous or randomized evaluation should be the state-of-the-art technology that's used. And of course, randomized evaluation is not going to be used everywhere, but we do want to certainly distinguish and help policymakers and the federal government distinguish between rigorous ex post evaluation versus I hired a consulting firm to make projections about what might be achieved using a ton of assumptions, and then we treated that as true. We know from our research in residential energy efficiency, which has been funded at a relatively high level since the ARA program 15 years ago, that you can have those projections made, be taken as fact, and then ex post evaluation shows that we're not getting what we think we're getting. Well, we don't want to be in a position as, we don't want to put the US government or our field of climate research in a position of sending projections to the international negotiations where we're sort of saying we're meeting our commitments under the Paris Accord when actually we're only getting 70%, for example, of what we thought we were getting, right? So one way to do that is to help the policy sphere at the federal level and at state and local level to distinguish between rigorous ex post evaluation, maybe randomized, maybe not, and projections, right? So that's where. So now we have the funding is flowing. We need to be embedding randomized and other ex post evaluation techniques in the development of these programs as they're being rolled out. And so how do we do that? Aaron's group here has been fielding calls from now dozens of state and local government offices that are saying, look, we would like to do evaluation. Can you match us with researchers? And we aren't coordinated enough as a research body. So one thing that we can do is coordinate ourselves and to some extent to keep the tail from wagging the dog, to begin to develop a research agenda within the economics community and what we think the big questions are, what we think we can answer with these tools, and to begin to think together about not how to run a one-off study, but how to work together to run sets of coordinated studies. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, and we'll solicit your input after lunch about how to think about that. So we want to help policymakers to be able to distinguish between projections with a lot of assumptions and gold standard methods for evaluating emissions impacts and welfare impacts. We want to be able to facilitate partnerships between researchers and policymakers in developing priorities for research. So Aaron's going to speak to this. So there's and Bruce is also going to speak to this. There's already fortunately, an ongoing program called Lever, which they'll speak about, that's training policymakers and then doing matchmaking with researchers. So that's going to help us get going in the near term. And then, over the next 5 years, begin to generate an evidence base on the cost effectiveness of different types of interventions and programs and the key behavioral mechanisms that underlie those impacts. So the objectives for today: we want to make sure, disseminate, spread the word that this is happening. We know that you all, fortunately, were able to be here in the room. There are many people who weren't in the room, maybe because they're interested in doing this work, they haven't been doing this work yet, but we hope that, on your respective campuses, in conversations over the next 6 months or whatever it is, when you're speaking with people about the possibility who might be interested in running a randomized evaluation or being involved in matchmaking events, that you can point them to something to get going, and that something will be this. So the idea is today to showcase some experimental research that's already been being done, to begin to coordinate ourselves as a research body that's using experimental methods to evaluate decarbonization programs, and then to develop some opportunities over the course of the next year to partner with policymakers to evaluate new interventions that are rolling out. And that's it. That's all I have. So I think, why don't we just take some questions at the end, because we have a few more presentations, and then if anybody has questions, we can. So up next, we have Bruce.
Thank you very much, Peter and Kim and Aaron. Welcome, everybody. This is very exciting to me. I'm not an environmental economist, but I'm super excited about this set of topics. I'm going to talk briefly about SLY, which is an initiative through JPAL North America, and Day Manoli and I are currently the co-chairs of that. And so I don't know if you could think about, I guess it's useful for two reasons. One, it's a bit of a model for what this new working group could do in terms of partnering with state and local governments, because that's what we've been doing since 2015. And I'll give you a couple examples of how we do that. And we do have funding opportunities that climate researchers could apply for. And so it's partly a model, it's partly that we've already got some climate-related research going on, and it's partly that there's funding opportunities. And so let me just take you through that. And I don't know, are my slides just stacked up nicely here? Perfect. So we're the State and Local Innovation Initiative. We've been around since about 2015. We've funded, roughly speaking, about 60 projects, many of which are still in the field, some of which have led to good results that are actually being implemented by the governments. And the reason this was started was that, I mean, there's a couple of reasons, right? One is that your best source of data and one of your best sources of data and your best chance of getting something in the field and getting a decent size experiment going is if you're working with, like, a state government. So, when the Puerto Rico Department of Education says, hey, we want to learn about computer assisted learning, they've got tens of thousands of students and hundreds of classrooms that our researchers were able to randomize into that. And then another reason is that if you actually learn something good, it tends to get implemented, right? And I think that, and so again, like with Puerto Rico as the example, like if this computer assisted learning, and by that in part we mean like Khan Academy, where they're going to mix traditional teaching with students like proceeding at their own pace. If that works, they're going to roll it out, throughout the whole territory. So that, that's a second reason why you might care about it. I thought Peter highlighted a really, something that's not unique to this current working group, but is really important, which is that we know there's going to be a lot of money spent on decarbonization technologies, right? And a lot of it will probably not be spent well, and some of it will be spent well. And so it is so critical to try to maximize the better policies and the better technologies are the ones that get emphasized. And so I think even more than some of the other JPAL initiatives where it's not clear how. It's clear that the government is very invested in the kind of policies that we're talking about, and to the tune of large dollars. And that's absolutely true in some of our SLY projects too. And I'll mention some of them. Kim already talked about this in general. What the different JPAL initiatives do. We try to build capacity. When we have policy conclusions, we reach out to our other research partners and we say, hey, well, it turns out, that this seems to work. This, if you're trying to reduce the number of people who are in the justice system who fail to make their court appearances, this is what we found in Boston. This might work in your place too. So we support jurisdictions in building evidence. We help build bridges between academic researchers. So when we get inbound calls like, well, we're interested in reducing the number of people who fail fail to appear for their court appearance, or we're interested in promoting socio-emotional well-being among students. We find researchers who work on those topics, and we help put the partnerships together. So we have typically researcher-facing calls for proposals where researchers can pitch us stuff where they're already partnered with the government, but we also have government-facing calls for proposals, and in a lot of times they don't have a researcher. And what's fun and challenging about that is a lot of times they don't have a research design. Like, they're interested in a question, they want to know. The New Mexico Department of Education called us up and said, well, we're very interested, we're worried about students who move a lot. We've got a lot of low-income students who move constantly, and how are we going to figure out how to best support them? And they had absolutely no research design, and the thing they proposed didn't look anything like a research design. But we got them some pilot funding, and we got some technical support, and we're working our way towards an RCT. So that's been, I also want to mention we have evaluation incubators where local governments can actually pitch in a Shark Tank-like way. They can pitch us a proposal on a topic that's of great interest to us, and then we give them feedback, and we iterate, and we try to get to a fully funded project. So that is what I want to say about that. We have at least 3 projects that have an environmental component. We have somewhat more than that. Probably the one you're going to hear about today from, and Jackson, I'm sorry if I mispronounce your last name, but it's Boomhauer, is that right? Yeah, awesome, good. That's probably the one that's most climate related, and I won't say too much about it, but it's very exciting. This was completely different than anything else that had been pitched to us before, and it's about mitigating the spread of wildfires. And so I think you're going to be super interested to hear about that. And they're testing a variety of different ways to get homeowners to implement policies that reduce fuel on the ground and try to reduce the risks. This is also climate related. I believe it's Pittsburgh, is trying to find out, does it make sense to offer bus subsidies to their local residents, and how much will that increase mobility, decrease car use, increase employment? And so that's a pretty exciting project. And governments, state and local governments, all the time want to have bus subsidies and subway subsidies, but very rarely do they actually study if those policies are doing anything other than sort of giving the money away or causing needless trips or what's happening with it. And so it's and the one I won't say I know a lot about it, but the one I know the most about because I helped review it is this very nice project in California which takes advantage of remote sensing technology. So particulates are an enormous problem, and heavy trucks are creating like 70% of the particulate emissions in the air from vehicles. And so there's lots of vehicles and fleets that aren't in compliance. And so the researchers and the state came up with a way to use remote sensing to monitor this. Is there a question? So Greenstone is one of the people. Michael Greenstone is one of the people. And if I was as smart as informed as the JPAL staff, I could tell you who the other researchers are. What's that? Yeah, thank you. There you go. See, I am at best a figurehead. I think Day has a much better memory than me. I'm like the cheerleader for this stuff. And and JPAL researchers and people much more detail oriented than me can tell you more about it. But it's a really cool project. And the experimental part of it is to see upon detecting a truck that is engaged in these violations, they can either try a soft touch, no touch, or soft touch where you send a letter saying, hey, gee, we noticed your truck is like belching black smoke all over this bucolic area. Or there's also, when it's a part of a fleet, they have an approach where they contact the company and there's a whole fine schedule, and so they're testing those different those touches, and so that's a really cool project. And like I said, we have 60 of these, some of which are completed, so that's really and that's an example where something that would have been impossible 15 years ago, with now with like some tiny little piece of equipment that can interface with an iPhone can tell you a tremendous amount. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so there are lots of opportunities for collaboration, and a lot of the initiatives that could come out of this working group could potentially get SLI funding. One of the great things about JPAL North America is that there's a no wrong door policy. So if you have a cool research idea, suppose you submit it to SLI, and we're like, oh, that's not really SLI, that's more COVID mitigation, or that's more like the health policy initiative or the education initiative. The staff and the co-chairs hopefully will get you to the right place, or will contact the other initiatives on your behalf to try to make things work and try to come up with co-funding. The current so typically twice a year, like the rest of JPAL North America, we have a call for proposals, and we put that out there. Do get on our email list, because that's how you find out about these things. You can check, obviously you can check our website, but you also, there are detailed emails about how and where to apply. What's cool about it, one, is this kind of no wrong door idea. Two, it's a very efficient application. We're not looking to torture you to then give you a revise, do 15 pages, get a revise, and resubmit to get rejected. We're trying to figure out, is there support for this in 3 pages? If you're excited about the idea, there's a pretty good chance we're going to be excited about it. It's like, okay, is this going to work? Okay, we have a few quick questions, go, right? And the initiative we currently have open is LEVER, which is a very clever and apt name, leveraging evaluation evidence for equitable recovery. And it's about, and Kim, please correct me if I misstate this, it's a joint initiative with Results for America, and it is based around the fact that there is government money in the ARP and the Inflation Reduction Act and the bills. And those, at least one or more of those bills, require that the states conduct evaluation of their use of the money. And so we are holding ourselves out there as a resource for state and local governments to come to us and say, okay, we're thinking of doing X. How can we evaluate this? Can you help us? Is this a fair summary? Yeah, and so we're excited about it. There's not a lot of other people in that space, if anyone. The states don't quite know what to do, and so we're trying to be a resource so that the governments can. And so we have a proposal. We have a call for proposals. I think it goes currently through August 4th. But again, through this no wrong door idea, just because August 4th passes doesn't mean you shouldn't get in touch with Kim or Day or me or Peter to talk about your idea. So I think I will shut up there and see if there are questions for anyone. And again, I think Kim is more likely to have a right answer than me, but I'm willing to give it a shot.
Great. Thank you, Bruce. All right, excellent. Oh, sorry. I am much shorter than everyone else who's spoken today. All right, so I'm going to close this out. I'm sorry that it's taking us an hour to explain who JPAL is and how all these different kind of teams work together, but hopefully it's helpful for you just to kind of get a lay of the land. So I'm going to very briefly explain who the E2C2 team is and kind of how we interact with some of these other initiatives and groups. So the E2C2 team is kind of one of 6 active programmatic sectors within the JPAL North America region. So other sectors focus on areas like education, health, labor force development, housing and homelessness, some of the projects Bruce had referred to as well. And the sector teams kind of lead the development and the execution of strategies for our program-specific work. And we then kind of leverage the funding and resources that come from these various initiatives. So E2C2 works particularly closely with the State and Local Innovation Initiative at JPAL North America, and then we also work really closely with the KCI team at Global. And together, we're kind of working to achieve the following 4 objectives. The first is really to identify the pressing policy issues and innovative solutions that we can really evaluate in this space. We're also cultivating this network of stakeholders. So this includes the policymakers and practitioners, but also the researchers as well, who can really help us to really launch these successful research partnerships. And together, we're hoping to really build this evidence base on effective climate mitigation as well as adaptation strategies, although I know the focus today is really on decarbonization. And ultimately, the goal is to kind of scale these evidence-based solutions. So as Bruce mentioned, State and local has recently launched Lever to really invest a large influx of federal funds in both evidence-based programs and rigorous evaluation of innovative approaches. So while Lever is supporting government leaders who are kind of working across a range of programmatic areas, our E2C2 team is really working closely to catalyze evaluations on a broad range of decarbonization efforts that both Peter and Bruce have spoken to, that will be rolled out over the next 5 years or so by state and local governments. So types of decarbonization efforts that we're looking at include increasing home energy efficiency and electrification, incentivizing rooftop solar and small-scale wind installations, improving public transportation systems, generating local financing instruments, as well as creating equitable green financial institutions. So there's just a lot of opportunity here. And as Peter mentioned, our goal is really to accumulate rigorous evidence as these state and local programs are implemented in order to kind of generate this evidence base that can inform the design of programs in other jurisdictions. And the goal is really to help also shape the national agenda. So we have big picture goals here on what we're hoping to achieve. So I wanted to spend just a few minutes explaining what Lever is, just because it's a new project, it's an exciting initiative, and there's multiple components to it that I thought might be helpful just to kind of talk through in a little bit more detail. So Bruce has already kind of spoken to it a little bit. It's a 2-year program that's, oh yes. Yes. So Lever is specifically for the US, yes, but generally speaking, we have other opportunities that are available to the full region, but that's a good question. No, you're fine. So Lever is helping to support government jurisdictions build their understanding of evaluation, knowledge of what it takes to build evidence and evaluation capacity, and the opportunity to access tailored support to develop their own rigorous evaluations. So the program actually commenced in May, but it's continuing through 2024. And we provide a range of offerings to government leaders who have kind of varying levels of capacity in data use and evaluation. So I think that's important because I think a lot of the folks who are coming to us aren't ready yet to partner and to kind of commence in an evaluation. So we have a number of activities that really help those who are kind of earlier stages kind of build their capacity in data use and evaluation. So we have workshops which are kind of like one-off introductory workshops that kind of introduce basic concepts and best practices for building evidence and evaluation capacity. And this is really helping jurisdictions to kind of develop some of the foundations that they need, like data use and measurement, community engagement, and partnership building. And then we also offer what are called training sprints, which are kind of these multi-week, longer-term virtual engagements that are kind of aimed at teams of government leaders who have some experience or capacity for evaluation, but they're kind of building that right now. And through programming that's kind of offered over several weeks, a cohort of government teams will learn together how to kind of identify and use rigorous evidence, strengthen their agency's evaluation policies specifically, and also build capacity to develop future evaluations. So we're currently actually accepting applications from jurisdictions for a fall training sprint through August. We're really excited to see who comes in the door and how many of those folks are specifically interested in climate. I know King County is one of the teams that's applying, so we're excited to be working closely with them. And then for those jurisdictions that are a little bit further along and have deeper capacity in evaluation, we kind of have 2 main areas of Lever programming where researchers are kind of ripe for engagement, with the goal of kind of facilitating connections with jurisdictions down the line. So the first are the evaluation incubators, which Bruce had already mentioned. This provides kind of the most formal and in-depth support for government agencies who are kind of primed to turn policy relevant research questions into well-designed randomized evaluations. So as Bruce mentioned, jurisdictions are actually submitting formal applications similar to RFPs that are submitted by researchers, and these successful applicants are going to receive training, one-on-one technical assistance from JPAL North America and Results for America staff, as well as funding that they can use in a pretty flexible way. And then JPAL is essentially working to matchmake these successful jurisdictions with academic researchers in order to actually get these evaluations off the ground. So we're excited that we have one evaluation incubator currently open, but there's going to be additional evaluation incubators that open over the course of the next year. And then finally, we have what are called virtual convenings, which provide somewhat less formal opportunities for researchers and government leaders and staff to connect and kind of share ideas about evaluation opportunities. So the goal of these convenings is really just to kind of make some initial connections between researchers and jurisdictions, explore research questions that might be of mutual interest, and kind of lay the groundwork for future research partnerships. So the first convening is going to be taking place in the winter of 2024. So we're kind of ramping up now to think through, like, how do we structure that? How do we make that as effective as possible, both for the jurisdictions who are participating as well as the researchers? So who is currently participating in LEVR? I can say that we already have around 100 jurisdictions who have filled out the LEVR intake form and provided information about kind of their areas of interest. And very interestingly, 50% of individuals express interest in climate and sustainability issues, of like everyone who came in. But when we kind of like really dug into who they are, what are the agencies that they're coming from, we've kind of focused in on about 15 jurisdictions who are more specifically interested in an evaluation of, a climate or a decarbonization program. And these range from jurisdictions like the governor's office in the state of Maine, to smaller cities and jurisdictions like the city of Glendale in Arizona, as just an example. And these jurisdictions have expressed a pretty broad interest in evaluating programs that range from things like sectoral job training for environmental justice jobs that came from the state of Maryland's Departments of Labor and Environment. There's folks who are interested in whole home electrification and decarbonization retrofit pilots for city residents. The city of Edina in Minnesota had mentioned that explicitly. And there's also the city of Los Angeles, who has said that they're really interested in vehicle electrification programs. So that's just kind of like a sampling of what we've learned, and I think we're continuing to build relationships with these folks who have started to engage with us through LEVR. And we'll actually have a breakout session this afternoon where we'll kind of learn from all of you on how we can best engage these jurisdictions, both through kind of the formal programming that's available, but also through, the lessons learned from all of you in building partnerships over the past few years on your research projects. I think the other thing to note is that we're continuing to build additional engagement from climate change and state and local jurisdictions in the coming months, and we're really trying to channel these folks into LEVR programming. So one other effort that I just wanted to mention quickly is that we're currently coordinating with some networking organizations such as C40 Cities and the Urban Sustainability Development Network, or USDN, in order to really kind of target and engage other prospective jurisdictions. So for those of you who are less familiar with these groups, C40 kind of serves as a global network of mayors from leading cities that are kind of united in climate action, and that includes 15 active cities in the US. And USDN works with local government sustainability practitioners in more than like 250 communities in North America. And they're really working to advance equitable, resilient, and local urban sustainability. So our hope is that by connecting with these network organizations, we'll be able to kind of a little bit more efficiently reach those jurisdictions who are very active in this climate space and might be interested in joining LEVR and connecting with the research network. So we'll come back to this at the end of the day as well, but we just wanted to give everyone a sense of kind of where there's opportunities for researcher engagement. First, we have the research agenda development that Peter's already spoken to. I think we're really hoping many of you in this room would be interested in working to develop this agenda in the coming months and to develop a potential academic article. The plan is to do probably monthly virtual meetings in order to kind of keep that moving forward from here. We also, as I mentioned, have an opportunity for researchers to engage in the upcoming LEVR matchmaking convening that's taking place this January. And then we also will continue to have a lot of informal matchmaking opportunities as we learn more about the interests from those who are participating in LEVR. And I think a lot of that matchmaking can kind of happen organically and on an ad hoc basis. And then, as Bruce had mentioned, we do have researcher-facing proposal opportunities through the State and Local Innovation Initiative, and LEVR has evaluation incubators that are submitted by jurisdictions, but actually Peter and Erica are a great example of this, where we have a jurisdiction, King County, who's submitting an application in collaboration with both of them. So I think there's many opportunities to submit. And I also just wanted to recognize, I know not everyone in this room is currently in the JPAL network, but I think we're really excited at the prospect of having those of you who are not join if this is of interest. And so I'm here and my staff is really excited to potentially work with you to develop nominations to submit to have you join so that you can access some of these resources if you are not already in the network. And then I think a year from now, we're really hoping to bring many of you back together to kind of reflect on where we're at in the working group and potentially look at a fully formed research agenda for this work. So just quickly, I'm going to run through what to expect for the rest of the day today. So we'll have a coffee break directly after this, and then we're going to go into about an hour of lightning research discussions led by Rob Metcalf, Erica Myers, and I think, Patrick, you're the one who's giving the presentation for today, right? Okay, great. So excited to learn more about some of the experimental research that's being conducted by the three of them. We'll break for lunch, and then this afternoon we'll be breaking out into some sessions to be focusing on these four kind of key questions that we think are going to be critical to hear directly from you and to have input on kind of how this working group can be most successful. So the first breakout group, which Peter will be facilitating, will be looking at questions around how JPAL can develop a coordinated research agenda on experimental evaluation of decarbonization interventions. And the idea here is really just to solicit ideas on the topics in the sections that can be covered by the article. Breakout B will be led by Erica. Thank you, Erica, for signing up last minute for that, on how JPAL can play a role in communicating, updating scientific consensus on what is scalable, as well as what is not scalable, what is actually not cost effective. Emma is going to be facilitating our breakout session C, which is looking at how can JPAL most effectively recruit policy partners, both within the LEVER program and at the federal level, and connect prospective partners with researchers. So I think hearing from all of you on your experience in partnership engagement is just going to be really critical in helping us be more successful in this area. And then I'll be facilitating the last breakout section, which is looking at how can JPAL leverage experiences with partner engagement to really reduce the barriers that we face in developing experimental evaluations. So even after you kind of make that partnership happen, then the real work begins, and how do we make that process as efficient and as effective as possible? So really looking forward to all of your contributions during the breakout sessions later today. And I think now we're opening it up for questions from any of us. Yeah. Jacqueline.
Well, first, thanks for organizing. This is a really exciting topic area and group. One thing I've been wondering, and this might be an opportunity actually for this group, I used to work for this organization called the National Conference of State Legislatures, where we partnered with state and local governments, basically to do training on policy-oriented things. And one of the challenges that I was always kind of frustrated with was, you do all this training. People get excited about it, they want to implement things, but then you face all the typical challenges of like turnover and the incentives to stay in office and all the things we're familiar with. So I was curious if JPAL or others or anybody in this room has like evaluated what types of training programs work and whether that's an opportunity to like embed some randomization in the training itself. I don't know, seems like an opportunity, right? Maybe the challenges of doing this.
No, I completely agree. Yeah, I'm curious if anyone in the room has actually conducted that type of evaluation. Oh, go ahead. Can I move this around? Can I take this off? Does anyone know? Oh, actually, yeah, if you would pass that, that'd be great.
Sorry, that's a really great question. I hadn't thought about it in quite that way. But thinking about, you said right at the beginning that one of the big problems is that people turn to consultants who do projections. And I assume that that's super common. So should we be bringing the consultants into this theory of change? So can we get the consultants, because you have to project before you do the first one, right? You can't evaluate until you've done something. So, often the consultants are the first point of contact. Can we bring some of the consultants in at least and get them to be using the evidence that you've generated elsewhere and get them then as part of this process to create a virtuous cycle here? And I'm thinking, I guess, particularly from global experience where the local jurisdictions, their staff turnover so fast that training them is kind of useless. But if you can train the consultants and you can train the academics, that they're often around for a lot longer, and that would be really interesting to explore. My other question was around the sort of disadvantaged communities focus, because Ira and Bill come with this Justice 40 initiative. So I'm interested in what's your strategy to make sure we get enough of those sort of projects happening and having RCTs on them, because they don't necessarily have the capacity to apply for this funding, to go through those processes. You could just end up working with the sophisticated actors.
Oh, did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, just coming back maybe to the one, in my experience so far, working with JPAL as, researcher trying to get something off the ground, I think there are two reasons for optimism, and turnover is always an issue, right? And so there are two benefits here that I see that give me reasons for optimism. One is that evaluation is required. So some sort of evaluation is required. There has to be capacity for something, and then the question is, can you nudge people and provide enough capacity and engagement to be able to push that in a rigorous direction, right? So that's one thing. But then you still face the turnover issue when you're training folks in any office. In my experience, one of the huge benefits of JPAL's model is that JPAL is an intermediary. JPAL staff often operate as an intermediary. So number one, the funding, especially through, for example, the incubator program, provides funding for additional staff within an office, but then that staff member might work directly with a JPAL staff member to help provide, get a proposal going and develop a series of sort of consistent meetings with the researchers. So I think that helps. That doesn't necessarily solve the problem, but I think that helps a lot relative to just trainings where and I don't know of any formal research, this is just anecdotal, where you provide a training and then go away. In terms of training the consultants, I guess I've thought a little bit about this, and I think there are two problems there. One is just the methodological training, and I think that we probably should be doing. But the other is, in terms of the relationship between government evaluation and consultancies, is that they're not necessarily independent, right? So the challenge is one of research integrity and a conflict of interest, which is sort of, right now, just we're not paying close enough attention to. So whereas I think we as researchers have pretty strict code of publishing whatever the results are on a given program or project, a consultancy that's being paid directly by the government entity, it's more difficult to maintain that. So if we can somehow create that as well, solve that problem as well, then I think we could put this in the hands of consultants. But I think that's another problem to solve.
Yeah, so something I just wanted to put out here for the group, I don't know how others are feeling, but one thing I'm potentially really excited about with a group like this is the ability to do ultimately like coordinated trials and thinking about external validity and scalability of interventions. And you have these jurisdictions coming to you with their own agendas and their own priorities, but maybe there's a way that JPAL in coordination with researchers could sort of say, okay, we want to learn something about heat pump adoption and the scalability of that, and what works in certain jurisdictions versus others, and how can lessons from one or two trials translate to more. And maybe like that requires sometimes having design elements be the same between trials in different locations. So to the extent that we can steer these kinds of larger, more coordinated efforts and like think really ambitiously, I think could be a really cool outcome of a group like this. So that's just a thought I've been having. It's a question.
Oh, thank you.
So there's a lot of opportunity coming in through federal funding in the next couple of years, but the challenge I imagine with any boom is that there's going to be a bust. And so I'm curious how, in particular, since like research is just a little bit more deliberate than the policy process and policy turnover that Jacqueline referred to. So I'm curious like how the JPAL infrastructure can kind of smooth that over time, sustain interest, even if, for example, there's a lot of funding, but there's a certain date in which some of that funding needs to be spent. And so how does JPAL infrastructure help sustain that interest, sustain the commitment in some sense, and allow us to learn even as some of the initial kind of excitement and funding may dissipate.
No, it's a great question. I think one of the goals that JPAL has is to synthesize the results of research and communicate those lessons. And there's a number of different ways in which we do that. We create policy products, but I think really what we're looking to do is to kind of use this moment in time to kind of generate the momentum, build the evidence base, and then take some of those lessons and kind of help to disseminate them out to even those who have not directly participated in the evaluations themselves, right? So I think the goal is to kind of build the network, build the interest from jurisdictions so that when we start learning what's working and what's not, we have kind of champions in place that are willing to kind of embed the results, change their programming in order to reflect, what we're learning from the research. And that kind of continues out even if the funding has specifically stopped for particular pilots, right? Because I think a lot of these programs will likely continue on in some fashion, especially for jurisdictions that are really committed to climate action, right? We have seen so many climate action plans from so many state and local governments. They're just trying to figure out what to do, where to spend their money. So I think you're right, there's an influx now, but I think there's going to be momentum moving forward, regardless of that influx of funding, to still figure out where to put resources and available funding and what to support moving forward. So one of the questions that we actually have in the breakout session is, how do we communicate these results? Like, I think we're specifically looking at, there's some scalable opportunities, others that are really not cost effective. And so how do we get that word out? How do we best communicate that to this broader group of jurisdictions that might still want that information but weren't directly involved in the process to begin with? So I think those are really good questions and something, we'll hopefully be able to support moving forward.
Two quick things on these points. So one is that in thinking about scaling, in talking with Michael a couple of weeks ago about this, one of the big issues that KCI is facing right now is that they have a lot of funding actually for scaling projects and not a lot of scaling projects to fund. So one model of that is that one researcher comes up with an idea and tries to develop something that's scalable. Another idea is that there is a coordinated type of model, and then that creates a scaling proposal. And I think they're very interested in that possibility. And it just, there needs to be a lot of thought about exactly how that works in order to come up with a compelling proposal, because it's not something that everybody does, but there's certainly funding. In terms of, some of the question about boom and bust cycles, one of the things I think about state and local governments is that, you have this influx of funding to grow programs, but then you also have just a steady funding at the state and local level that is that is just the way that state and local programs funds are allocated. So it's not as though the spigot's gonna completely turn off. But when we think about evaluation, so for example, in discussions with C40, so C40's big initiative, 20 years ago, was to help cities around the world develop climate action plans. And part of the climate action plan is you develop an emissions inventory. You try to measure the emissions that are coming from your jurisdiction. That's where they still are, right? So in our conversations with them, now that there's funding and that they understand that programs are being developed, how do we attribute the impacts of a program or any emissions reductions to the impacts of a program? They realize that those tools, the tools that they have been disseminating for the last 20 years, will not help solve that problem. But they're really interested in solving that problem, right? So if our community can provide some of those tools, how to make attribution, which is exactly what we do in any sort of ex post evaluation, then that could move the needle also in ways that are more persistent, I think, in evaluation.
So one thing that strikes me is that a lot of the kind of momentum for this work comes out of a piece of legislation that speaks loosely about what kind of evaluation, like some kind of rigorous evaluation that should occur. So I'm wondering if there's like a strategic move for JPAL or this group plus kind of successful projects and policymakers involved in those projects to push for more specific requirements around what ex post like what proper evaluation looks like into legislation at the state level. I mean, I'm certain that people have thought about this. So I guess my question is, yeah, how are you thinking about it, and how does this group or a broader group push for that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I happen to have some conversation about this with Meredith Powell, who wound up sharing a long plane ride from San Francisco here. And she was saying that during ARA, apparently, I wasn't aware of this, but during ARA, that was written in to the ARA legislation, that there would actually be teams of researchers paired with governments to do evaluation. The capacity for that was relatively low, and I guess she communicated to at least Joe Aldi to try to see whether that could be done here, and it hasn't been in the same way. But certainly there is some precedent for that. She was going to direct me to some of the language in ARA around that. And I think that it is, potentially part of the role of this working group to help begin thinking about that and potentially formalize it. Certainly something that we could
Yeah.
try to
Kim,
take on.
did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, just another small example is through the American Rescue Plan, we've developed a relationship, we being JPAL, with the Treasury Department, which is leading much of that work with state and local governments. And they've actually come to us and ask us to review their research agenda. I think Bruce and Day have shared that with researchers within the network. So we're having, it's a little example of how we're building that relationship and providing some input from both JPAL staff, but more importantly from the researchers in the network around their research agenda and what kinds of evaluations should be approached or expected for the different programs that they're putting out, and also some of the programs that are coming back to them from state, some of the proposals of what should be done with those and how they should be evaluated. So it's a small piece, but I think some of that kind of work is something JPAL's trying to move forward with as well.
No, exactly. And I think the work that hopefully this group will be conducting is going to be providing some of the evidence on, why this type of evaluation is so critical. And my hope is that that's going to provide some of the inroads that we need to kind of make that request. I think we do not currently have the relationships to have that happen at the federal government level, but I think the fact that Catherine Wolfram is already within federal government, I think we're definitely moving towards that, but I think we're early stages for sure. And just quickly, because I feel like Jacqueline and Susie, we didn't directly answer your earlier questions. I think, Jacqueline, the point to training, we have a training team at JPAL North America, and I think the global JPAL team has one as well. And I think we are always really interested in figuring out how do we know what training is most effective in helping not just governments, but any practitioners really get from where they currently are to being ready to join and successfully implement a research partnership. And I don't think we have any rigorous evaluation strategies in place yet, but I think it's a really good question and a good point, and I think we'd love to discuss that a bit more. And Susie, to your point about kind of the equity piece, I think it's a really important one. LEVER actually stands for, I named this, so I should know this off the top of my head, Leveraging Evidence and Evaluation for Equitable Recovery. So equity is a really key foundation to that program, and I think RFA is really leading efforts in thinking about how do we kind of focus on equity in the evaluation policies that are being developed by these jurisdictions. So I think RFA can probably speak a bit more directly to that. I don't know, Kim, if you wanted to speak to anything on the equity side specifically, but it's very kind of central to the way that the programming is conducted. And I think there's a lot of questions now on how does that actually reflect in policies and what does that actually mean for how programs are designed. I think there's a huge component that's looking at how we get kind of participation from the communities themselves who are directly impacted by a lot of the programming. But happy to speak more about that because I think it's a really important question. And I know we're over time, but these are really great questions. Happy to take another one if people don't mind it eating into coffee break. Yes.
Yes, related to that, I know that, and to Susie's question, I know that a lot of funding is coming, well, not conditional, but it's expecting some community engagement with community partners. And a lot of what you talked about is based on local governments, but some of these community groups sometimes do not directly work with the government. So I was wondering if you have some way of engaging with them, because it's sometimes hard as researchers that sometimes creating those relationships. So I will be happy to hear about those.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, Kim, there's a whole section on,
I think oftentimes the evaluation incubators that we talk about some of them are geared directly to state and local governments, but they often come in with partners. So there might be a government that has a policy on housing, but they don't actually administer the program. They work with a local housing organization that administers the program. So it becomes sort of a four-way partnership. We've got the community organization that's actually implementing the program, the government that's funding it, JPAL, and then a researcher that's working to design the evaluation. We have other initiatives where they're open to any nonprofit, including government. So we have local nonprofit organizations that might be, we have a set from, we're working with a group 4 or 5 different programs in Los Angeles right now that are all standing up housing programs. So the Los Angeles city government isn't actually involved, it's all those local organizations. So we do a balance of both focusing strictly on governments, but also including those other community partners. It just depends sort of on the funding stream and what the project is. But I would imagine in some of these kinds of projects that the governments will be coming in with local partners that are helping to administer or even fully implement the programs that they're hoping to do.